The giant's massive hands trembled as he held the reins, his voice barely above a whisper despite his towering 7-foot frame. "When I first saw you, it was love at first sight." Zephyra Nightingale's rifle froze halfway to her shoulder, the barrel still smoking from the shot that had dropped the rattlesnake coiled to strike her mare's hooves. She'd been so focused on the serpent that she hadn't heard the approaching hoofbeats, hadn't noticed the mountain of a man watching her from astride a horse that looked more like a draft animal than any cowpony she'd ever seen. "Excuse me?" She sighed, her voice sharp with the wariness of a woman who'd learned to trust no one in this godforsaken stretch of Wyoming territory. Bauden Ironwood, though she didn't know his name, yet sat frozen in his saddle like a child caught stealing candy. His weather-beaten face flushed red beneath the shadow of his black hat, and for a moment the most feared bronc-buster in 3 counties looked like he might bolt. I shouldn't have said that," he stammered, his deep voice carrying an unexpected gentleness. "It's just, you handled that snake like you were born to it. Most folks would have screamed or run, but you just—" He gestured helplessly with hands the size of dinner plates. "You were magnificent." Zephyra studied him with ice-blue eyes that had seen too much cruelty to trust easily. The man was indeed a giant, shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, arms thick as fence posts, a chest that strained the buttons of his worn work shirt. Everything about him should have terrified her, especially after what she'd endured at the hands of violent men. But there was something in his dark eyes, a kindness that seemed at odds with his intimidating size. "You've been watching me," she sighed, not quite a question. Bauden's flush deepened. Not like that. I mean, I wasn't spying or nothing improper. It's just—" He took off his hat and ran thick fingers through coal-black hair. "You ride this stretch every Tuesday and Friday, heading to town for supplies. I work the Broken Arrow spread just over that ridge. Sometimes I see you pass, and you—" "What?" The words seemed to stick in his throat. This man who could break wild horses with his bare hands, who'd faced down rustlers and wolves without flinching, looked like he might die of embarrassment. "I wait for you," he finally admitted. "I finish my work early those days and ride up to the ridge just to watch you pass. You sit a horse like you were born in the saddle, and you've got this way of moving, like you're dancing with the wind." Zephyra's grip tightened on her rifle. She'd heard pretty words before, right before hands turned cruel and voices turned. "Maine, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," Bauden said quickly. "I swear it. I don't want nothing from you except ... He struggled visibly with the words. "Except maybe to know your name, and maybe to ride alongside you sometime, if you'd allow it. These roads ain't safe for a woman alone. I can take care of myself." The words came out harder than she'd intended, sharp with years of having to prove that very point. "I can see that," he said gently. "That shot you made just now? Most men couldn't have made it. But that don't mean you should have to face everything alone." The kindness in his voice made something crack inside her chest, a wall she'd built, brick by brick over the past 3 years. She'd come to Wyoming to disappear, to lose herself in the endless sky and forget what men could do to a woman who trusted too easily. The last thing she needed was some gentle giant making her feel things she'd sworn never to feel again. But as she looked up at him, really looked, she saw something that made her pause. Loneliness. It radiated from him, like heat from a forge, a bone-deep solitude that matched her own. "Zephyra," she said finally. "My name is Zephyra Nightingale." His whole face lit up like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Bauden Ironwood, ma'am, and that's the prettiest name I ever did hear." "You? Named after the wind?" Bauden asked as they rode side by side toward Copper Falls, his massive gelding keeping an easy pace beside her smaller mare. Zephyra glanced at him sideways, surprised by the question. Most men she'd known weren't given to poetry or curiosity about such things. My grandmother said it meant west wind in the old tongue. Said I was born during a storm that blew in from the western mountains. Suits you, he said simply, wild and free and beautiful. Heat crept up her neck despite herself. She wasn't used to compliments that didn't come with expectations attached. What about you? Bawden's not a name you hear much in these parts. My Daddy was from somewhere back east. Had one of them European names I can't even pronounce proper. Mama just called him Bio, so when I came along bigger than any baby had a right to be, she figured I'd need a bigger name to match. He smiled, a shy expression that transformed his craggy features. Ironwood was what the midwife called me on account of how hard my head was. Broke 3 water basins trying to birth me. Despite herself, Zephyra found her lips twitching. Your poor mother. She used to say I was her gentle giant. Said God made me big so I could protect things that needed protecting, but gave me a soft heart so I wouldn't become what I looked like I could be. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Zephyra had learned to read men like storm clouds. And everything about Bawden suggested he was telling the truth. The way he held his reins with careful gentleness, how he'd positioned his horse between her and the open range without making it obvious, the patient way he waited for her responses. Instead of demanding them, "Where you from originally?" he asked as they crested a small hill that gave them a view of Copper Falls in the distance. The question made her stiffen. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of deflecting personal inquiries, of keeping her past buried where it belonged. Here and there, I move around a lot. Running from something? The blunt question caught her off guard. She turned to study his face, expecting to see the calculating look of a man trying to find her weaknesses. Instead, she found only gentle concern. We all run from something, she said carefully. True enough. Bawden was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been running from loneliness for about 15 years now, ain't been very successful at it. The admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected crude advances or smooth lies, not this raw honesty that left him completely vulnerable. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you got the same look in your eyes that I see in the mirror every morning. Like you're carrying something too heavy for one person to bear. He looked out over the rolling grassland, his profile etched against the vast sky. I ain't saying I could help carry it. Don't even know what it is. But sometimes it helps just knowing you ain't the only one who's tired. Zephyra felt tears prick her eyes and turned away quickly. She couldn't remember the last time someone had seen her and offered comfort instead of trying to take advantage. The broken arrow, she said, grasping for safer ground. That's Jeremiah Morrison's spread, isn't it? Was. He sold out to some Eastern investors last month. They kept me on to handle the horses. Bawden's voice carried a note of uncertainty. For now, anyway. City folks don't much like the way I look. Make them nervous. You ever think about starting your own place? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what? I got enough saved. For maybe a quarter section of played-out land and a handful of ornery cattle. Besides, who'd sell to someone like me? I walk into the bank and they reach for their guns before I can even state my business. Zephyra understood that feeling all too well. She'd learned that being different, whether by size, sex, or circumstance made you a target in towns like Copper Falls. There's good grazing land up in the high country, she said quietly. Hard to reach, but the grass runs thick and the water's clean. Man could run a small herd up there if he knew what he was doing. You? Know about cattle ranching? I know about a lot of things. She pulled her hat lower, shading her eyes from the afternoon sun. Sometimes necessity teaches you skills you never thought you'd need. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. As they approached the outskirts of town, Zephyra felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. Copper Falls meant people, and people meant questions she didn't want to answer. "Miss Nightingale," Bodden said suddenly, his voice formal again, "would you ... that is, might I? Could I ride with you again on Friday? For safety, I mean." She looked at him one more time. This gentle giant who'd stumbled into her carefully guarded world with nothing but honest words and kind eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to protect the walls she'd built so carefully. Instead, she heard herself say, "I suppose that would be acceptable, Mr. Ironwood?" His smile could have lit up the entire territory. Friday came faster than Zephyra expected, bringing with it a nervousness she hadn't felt in years. She found herself checking her reflection in the cracked mirror above her wash basin, smoothing down hair that had never cared about such things before, wondering if the blue shirt brought out her eyes or just made her look foolish. "Fool woman," she muttered to herself, but she wore the blue shirt anyway. Bodden was waiting at their agreed-upon meeting spot, the old cottonwood where Willow Creek bent toward the main road, and the sight of him made her heart skip in a way that should have terrified her. He'd clearly made an effort, too. His shirt was pressed, his hair slicked back with what looked like pomade, and he'd shaved so close she could see the small scar on his jaw that she'd never noticed before. "Morning, Miss Nightingale," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You look mighty pretty today." "Thank you." The words felt rusty in her throat. When was the last time she'd accepted a compliment without suspicion or sarcasm? As they rode toward town, their conversation flowed easier than it had the previous Tuesday. Bodden told her about the new foals at the Broken Arrow, how he'd gentled a particularly ornery stallion by singing to it, the way the mountains looked when the first snow dusted their peaks. In return, she found herself sharing small things. She'd learned to track by watching wolf packs, the best places to find wild berries, the way the wind sounded different depending on what weather was coming. "You ever been married, Miss Nightingale?" The question came out of nowhere as they paused to water their horses at Miller's Creek. Zephyra's blood turned to ice. "No," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Me neither. Always figured I was too big, too rough around the edges. Most ladies take one look at me and cross the street." He glanced at her with something like wonder. "You didn't, though. First time I saw you handle that snake, you looked right at me like I was just ... normal." "You are normal," she said before she could stop herself. "Am I?" His dark eyes searched her face. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing at being human, like everyone else got instructions I never received. Like I'm too much of everything, too big, too quiet, too intense." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his saddle horn. His skin was warm and calloused from honest work, and she felt him shiver at the contact. "You're not too much of anything," she said quietly. "You're just ... more. More kind than people expect, more gentle. More real." For a moment they stayed like that, her small hand covering his massive one, something electric passing between them. In the space of a heartbeat. Then a shout from the road ahead broke the spell, and they both pulled back as if burned. "Riders coming," Bodden said, his voice suddenly tense. 3 men approached at a hard gallop, dust clouds billowing behind them. Zephyra recognized them immediately, Cutter Briggs and his boys, the kind of men who made honest folks lock their doors after dark. They pulled up short when they saw Bodden, their horses snorting and pawing. "Well, well," Cutter said, his pale eyes sliding over Zephyra with obvious appreciation. "If it ain't the mysterious lady with the fancy shooting. And look who she's taken up with, the freak from the Broken Arrow." Bodden's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Morning, Cutter. You boys best move along. This is a peaceful morning, and I'd like to keep it that way." "Oh, would you now?" Cutter's grin was all teeth and no warmth. "See, that's where we got a problem. Me and the boys been wondering about Miss Mystery here, haven't we, boys?" Pretty little thing like that, all alone in the territory. Makes a man curious about her circumstances. Move along, Cutter. Baden's voice carried a warning now, low and dangerous. Or what? You'll stomp on us with them big feet? Cutter laughed, but his hand had moved to rest on his gun butt. Maybe the lady would prefer some company that don't scare small children. What do you say, darling? Ready to trade? Up? Zephyra's hand moved instinctively toward her rifle, but before she could draw it, Baden was out of his saddle. For such a big man, he moved with surprising speed, crossing the distance to Cutter's horse in 3 long strides. I said move along. Baden's hand closed around Cutter's ankle, and the smaller man's cocky grin faltered. This lady's under my protection, and I don't take kindly to folks making her uncomfortable. You threatening me, giant? I'm promising you. Baden's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. You can ride away now with your dignity intact, or I can drag you off that horse and teach you some manners. Your choice. For a tense moment, Zephyra thought Cutter might actually draw. His face was flushed with anger and humiliation, and his 2 companions were fingering their weapons nervously. Then he looked into Baden's dark eyes and seemed to see something there. That changed his mind. This ain't over, he muttered, jerking his foot free. Yes, it is, Baden said simply. The 3 men rode off in a cloud of dust and muttered curses, leaving Zephyra and Baden alone by the creek. She realized she was shaking not from fear, but from the realization of what had just happened. Someone had protected her. Someone had stood between her and danger without expecting anything in return. You didn't have to do that, she said. Baden remounted his horse, his expression troubled. Yes, I did. A man don't let scum like that intimidate a lady. He paused, then added quietly, besides, I meant what I said. You're under my protection. Now if you'll have it, the words should have made her angry. She'd worked too hard for her independence to let any man claim ownership of her safety. Instead, they made her feel something she'd thought was dead forever, cherished, the encounter. With Cutter Briggs changed something between them. As they continued toward Copper Falls, Zephyra found herself studying Baden with new eyes. She'd seen him angry, truly angry, and instead of the violence she'd expected, she'd witnessed controlled strength used only to protect, no unnecessary force, no showboating, just quiet determination to keep her safe. You've done that before, she said as they rode. Done what? Faced down men like Cutter. You handled it too smooth for it to be your first time. Baden was quiet for a long moment. My size makes me a target. Always has. Men want to prove themselves by taking down the giant, you know? I learned early that most fights can be avoided if you're willing to be the first one to walk away. But when walking away ain't an option, he shrugged. Well, I ain't never lost a fight I couldn't avoid. What made you so sure Cutter would back down? Because he's the type who only picks fights he knows he can win. Soon as he realized I wasn't going to be intimidated, he lost interest. Baden glanced at her sideways. You would have handled it fine yourself, though. I seen the way you reached for that rifle. Fast as a snake strike. You noticed that? I notice everything about you, Miss Nightingale. Can't seem to help myself. The admission sent warmth flooding through her chest. When was the last time anyone had paid such careful attention to her, not as a threat to be assessed or a prize to be won, but simply because they found her fascinating? They reached the outskirts of Copper Falls as the sun climbed toward noon. The town was bigger than most in the territory, 2 main streets lined with false-fronted buildings, a hotel that actually had glass windows, and enough saloons to keep the cowboys and miners happy. It was also the kind of place where strangers were noticed and gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Miss Nightingale, Baden said as they approached the main street, might I ask you something? You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer. He smiled at that. Fair enough. I was wondering. Would you allow me to buy you dinner at the hotel restaurant? Nothing improper, he added quickly. Just two friends sharing a meal. Zephyr's first instinct was to refuse. Eating in the hotel. Dining room meant being seen together, becoming the subject of speculation and gossip. It meant stepping out of the shadows she'd hidden in for 3 years, but the hopeful look in his dark eyes made her reconsider. When was the last time someone had wanted her company for no reason other than enjoying her conversation? I suppose that would be acceptable, she heard herself say. The hotel restaurant was fancier than anything Zephyr had experienced since arriving in Wyoming. White tablecloths, actual napkins, and food that didn't come from a can or a skillet over an open fire. She felt suddenly self-conscious in her trail clothes, aware of every eye in the room following their progress to a corner table. Folks are staring, she murmured as they sat down. Let them, Bodden said with surprising firmness. I'm proud to be seen with the most beautiful woman in the territory. You're going to ruin your reputation, being seen with a mysterious stranger. What reputation? He laughed, but there was an edge to it. Half the town thinks I'm some kind of dangerous freak. The other half just thinks I'm simple-minded because I don't talk much in company. Having dinner with a lovely lady can only improve things. The waiter approached their table with obvious reluctance, his eyes darting nervously between Bodden's massive frame and Zephyr's cool stare. What'll it be? He asked curtly. The lady will have the beef stew and fresh bread, Bodden said politely. I'll take the same and coffee for both of us, please. When the waiter left, Zephyr raised an eyebrow. How did you know what I wanted? Lucky guess. You strike me as someone who appreciates simple, honest food. He paused, then added, Was I wrong? No, she admitted. You weren't wrong. Their conversation over dinner revealed more pieces of each other's puzzles. Bodden told her about growing up on a hardscrabble farm, how his unusual size had made him a curiosity from childhood, the way his parents had died in a wagon accident. When he was 16, leaving him to make his own way in a world that didn't know what to do with gentle giants. In return, Zephyr found herself sharing carefully edited versions of her own story. She'd been raised on a small ranch, had learned to ride and shoot out of necessity, had lost her family to illness and decided to make a fresh start in new territory. All true as far as it went, though she left out the husband who'd beaten her. The night she'd finally fought back, the way she'd had to disappear before the law decided whether she was a victim or a murderer. You planning to stay in the territory long? Bodden asked as they finished their meal. The question caught her off guard. She'd spent 3 years never planning beyond the next town, the next job, the next place to hide. But sitting across from this kind, honest man, she found herself thinking about permanence for the first time since she'd fled Kansas. I don't know, she said honestly. I've gotten used to moving on when things get complicated. Things don't have to be complicated, he said quietly. Sometimes they can be simple. Good, even. Can they? She met his eyes across the table. In my experience, things have a way of going wrong just when you start believing they might go right. Maybe you just ain't been around the right kind of people. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the street outside. Shouts, running footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Bodden was on his feet instantly, his hand automatically moving to shield her as they both moved toward the window. Through the glass, they could see Cutter Briggs and his men riding hard. Down Main Street, guns drawn, whooping like Comanches. Behind them, the sheriff and a hastily assembled posse were giving chase, but their horses were already winded. Bank robbery, someone in the restaurant said. Bold as brass in broad daylight. Bodden's jaw tightened as he watched the outlaws disappear around the bend toward the Badlands. They'll get away clean. Sheriff's horse is about done in, and those boys know every hiding place between here and the Colorado border." "Good riddance," the waiter muttered. "Town's better off without their kind." But Zephyra was thinking about something else entirely. She was thinking about the way Cutter had looked at her, the threats he'd made, and the very real possibility that men like that didn't forget slights easily. "We should go," she said quietly. Bodden nodded, understanding immediately. They paid for their meal and headed for the door, but as they stepped onto the boardwalk, Sheriff Holloway approached them, his face grim with frustration. "Bodden," he said, touching his hat brim. "Miss, don't suppose either of you saw which way Briggs and his boys headed after they cleared the town limits?" "North toward Devil's Canyon," Bodden replied. "But Sheriff, they had a good 10-minute head start. By the time you get a fresh posse together—" "I know." Holloway's shoulders sagged. "Slippery as greased snakes, that bunch. We'll never catch them in open country." Zephyra found herself speaking before she'd fully thought it through. What if you didn't have to chase them in open country? What if you knew where they were going? To be? Both men turned to stare at her. "Ma'am," the sheriff said. "Those men have a grudge against us now," she said, looking at Bodden. "Men like Cutter don't let things go. They'll be back, probably tonight, looking to settle the score from this morning." "You think they'll come after you?" Holloway asked. "I'd bet money on it." Zephyra's mind was already working through the possibilities. "And when they do, they'll expect to find a helpless woman and an oversized cowpoke who's all bark and no bite." Bodden's eyes began to gleam with understanding. "But what they'll actually find ... is a trap," Zephyra finished. "If you're willing to spring it." The plan was simple, dangerous, and probably foolish, which made it exactly the kind of thing that might actually work. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Zephyra and Bodden rode back toward her cabin with Sheriff Holloway and 3 of his best men following at a discreet distance. "You sure about this?" Bodden asked for the 3rd time as they approached the turnoff to her homestead. "No," Zephyra admitted, "but I'm sure that Cutter won't let this morning go unanswered. Better to face him on our terms than wait for him to choose the time and place." Her cabin sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine-covered hills, with only one good approach from the main trail. It was defensible if you knew what you were doing, which Zephyra had made sure to learn during her 3 years of living alone. She'd chosen this place specifically because it could be protected by one person with a rifle and determination. "Cozy," Bodden said as they dismounted in front of the small log structure. "It's not much, but it's mine." She felt suddenly self-conscious about the humble cabin with its single room, rough-hewn furniture, and complete lack of feminine touches. "I don't entertain much. It's perfect," he said simply. "Suits you." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Sheriff Holloway and his men took positions in the tree line where they could observe the approach trail but remain hidden. Bodden checked and rechecked his rifle. Though Zephyra suspected he could probably handle Cutter's bunch with his bare hands if necessary. As for herself, she went through the familiar ritual of preparing for violence, cleaning her weapons, checking her ammunition, settling her mind into the cold, focused state that had kept her alive when her husband's fists turned deadly. "Miss Nightingale," Bodden said as they waited on her front porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "If things go bad tonight, they won't. But if they do, I want you to know something." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "These past few days, riding with you, talking with you, it's been the best time of my life. You made me feel like maybe I ain't the freak everybody thinks I am." "You're not a freak," she said firmly. "You're the best man I've ever known." "Am I?" He reached out tentatively, his massive hand hovering near her cheek. "Because if that's true, then maybe when this is over, The sound of hoofbeats on the trail cut him off. Multiple horses, moving fast but trying to be quiet about it. Zephyra blew out the lamp and they both moved to their predetermined positions, she by the window with her rifle, he beside the door with his shotgun. "Remember," she whispered, "let them get close enough that the sheriff can surround them. We want them alive if possible." Bodden nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't particularly concerned about Cutter Briggs' continued well-being. Riders emerged from the tree line like shadows, 5 men instead of the expected 3. Cutter had picked up reinforcements somewhere, probably from the robbery. They approached the cabin in a loose line, guns drawn, thinking they were hunting helpless prey. "You in there, giant," Cutter called out when they were about 50 yards away. "Come on out and bring your lady friend. We got some unfinished business to discuss." "Go to hell, Cutter," Bodden replied calmly. "Now that ain't very neighborly. Tell you what, send the woman out and maybe we'll let you live. She's got some making up to do for the disrespect she showed us." Zephyra felt ice form in her veins. She'd heard that tone before, knew exactly what kind of making up men like Cutter had in mind. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Only thing getting made up tonight is your mind about whether to ride away peaceful or get carried away dead," Bodden called back. Big words for a freak hiding behind a woman's skirts. That did it. Bodden stood up, his massive silhouette filling the doorway. "I'm right here, Cutter. You want a piece of me, come and take it. With pleasure." Cutter spurred his horse forward, his men spreading out behind him. They made it about 20 yards before Sheriff Holloway's voice rang out from the darkness. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." The outlaws' heads whipped around as lanterns flared to life in the trees, revealing the badges and rifles of the waiting lawmen. For a moment, Zephyra thought they might actually surrender. Then Cutter snarled a curse and opened fire. The night exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like deadly fireflies as the outlaws found themselves caught in a crossfire between the cabin and the tree line. Bodden's shotgun boomed twice, dropping one man from his saddle. Zephyra's rifle cracked steadily, her shots precise and deadly. It was over in less than a minute. When the smoke cleared, 3 outlaws lay still on the ground, one was crawling away with a shattered leg, and Cutter Briggs sat on his horse with his hands raised, blood streaming from a graze on his temple. "Well," Sheriff Holloway said as he emerged from the trees, "that went about as well as could be expected." Bodden was already moving toward Zephyra, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "You hurt?" "I'm fine." She was physically at least. "But—" Her hands were shaking as the adrenaline began to fade, and she felt the familiar sick twist in her stomach that came after violence. "You?" "Not a scratch." He reached out and gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "It's over now. They can't hurt you anymore." But as the sheriff and his men began the grim business of dealing with the aftermath, Zephyra couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Tonight had changed everything between her and Bodden, had revealed parts of herself she'd tried to keep hidden. He'd seen her kill without hesitation, had witnessed the cold precision that came from too much experience with violence. Would he still look at her the same way? Would he still think she was worth protecting, worth caring about? As if reading her thoughts, Bodden stepped closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You did what you had to do. Ain't no shame in protecting yourself and the people you care about." "Is that what I did?" she asked quietly. "Protect the people I care about?" "Yes," he said firmly. "And I'm grateful for it. More grateful than you know." The warmth in his voice, the absolute acceptance in his dark eyes, made something break open inside her chest. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could see all of her and still choose to stay. 3 days after the shootout, Zephyra found herself in an unexpected place. The Copper Falls Church, sitting in the front pew beside Bodden as the town gathered to thank them for their role in bringing Cutter Briggs and his gang to justice. The bank had offered a substantial reward, and the territorial governor himself had sent a letter of commendation. "Never thought I'd be a hero," Bodden murmured as Preacher Williams droned on about courage and civic duty. "You've always been a hero," Zephyra replied quietly. "You just needed the right fight." The ceremony was mercifully brief, but the aftermath stretched long into the afternoon. It seemed like every person in Copper Falls wanted to shake Bodden's massive hand and get a look at the mysterious woman who could shoot like Annie Oakley and think like a cavalry officer. Zephyra endured the attention with grace born of desperation. But by the time they finally escaped to the quiet of her cabin, she was exhausted. "You don't like crowds much," Bodden observed as they sat on her front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Never have. Too many people asking too many questions." She leaned back in her chair, finally allowing herself to relax. "What about you? Enjoy your moment of fame?" "Some of it. Mostly I just kept thinking about how this changes things." "Changes things how?" Bodden was quiet for a long moment, his big hands clasped loosely in his lap. "Well, for one thing, that reward money means I can afford to buy some land now. Maybe start that ranch we talked about." "That's good," Zephyra said, though something cold settled in her stomach. "You'll do well. You've got the touch with horses. Miss Nightingale. Zephyra ... There's something I need to say to you." The formal tone of his voice made her turn to look at him. His expression was serious, almost grave, and she felt her walls start to rebuild themselves automatically. "What I said that first day, about love at first sight, I meant it. More than I've ever meant anything in my life." He stood up and began, pacing the length of the small porch, his movements restless with barely contained energy. "I know we ain't known each other long, and I know you got reasons for keeping your past private. Don't matter to me what came before. What matters is what comes next." Zephyra felt her heart begin to race, fear and hope warring in her chest. "Bodden, let me finish, please." He stopped pacing and dropped to one knee beside her chair, making them almost eye level. "I'm asking you to marry me, Zephyra. I'm asking you to let me build that ranch for both of us, to let me spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are like the ones who hurt you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt it building between them with every shared glance and gentle word. But knowing and being ready were two very different things. "You don't know what you're asking," she whispered. "I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met to take a chance on a man who loves her more than his own life." "I'm not brave," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm a coward who ran away instead of facing what I'd done. I'm damaged goods, Bodden. Used up and broken, and stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "I don't know what happened to you before you came here, but I know what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who survived something terrible and came out stronger. I see someone who protects the innocent and stands up to bullies. I see the woman I want to spend my life loving." Tears were streaming down her face now, years of held-back emotion finally breaking free. "You don't understand. I killed a man back in Kansas. My husband. He used to." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the haunted look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Bodden's expression went very still, very cold. "Did he hurt you?" "Every day for 3 years. I tried to leave, but he always found me." Sighed. "He'd kill me before he let me go." The words poured out of her like poison from a wound. "One night he came home drunk and angry, and when he raised his hand to me, I grabbed the poker from the fireplace. I didn't mean to kill him, but when he fell and hit his head on the hearth." "Good," Bodden said quietly. Zephyra stared at him. "What?" I said. "Good. Any man who'd raise his hand to a woman, especially his wife, deserves whatever he gets." Bodden reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "You defended yourself. Ain't no shame in that. The law might see it different. There could still be a warrant. Then we'll face it together." His voice carried absolute certainty. "But I don't think you got anything to worry about. Self-defense is self-defense, and any judge worth his salt would see that." She searched his face for any sign of disgust, of fear, of the judgment she'd been dreading for 3 years. Instead, she found only love and fierce protectiveness. "You still want to marry me, even knowing what I am?" "What you are," Bodden said, taking her hands in his massive ones, "is the woman I love. What you are is home. What you are is everything I never dared to hope for." The last of her walls crumbled. 3 years of running, of hiding, of believing she was unworthy of love, all of it dissolved in the face of this gentle giant's unwavering acceptance. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes, I'll trust you with my heart." She smiled through her tears. "But I have one condition. Name it. We build that ranch together. Equal partners in everything. I'm not looking for a man to take care of me. I'm looking for a man to stand beside me." Bodden's answering smile was brighter than the sunset behind him. "Deal, partner." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Zephyra finally understood what home felt like. 6 months later, the sound of hammering rang across the high meadow as Bodden and Zephyra put the finishing touches on their ranch house. It wasn't much yet, 3 rooms and a stone fireplace, with plans to add more as their fortunes improved, but it was theirs. Built with their own hands on. Land they'd bought with reward money and honest sweat. "Hand me that last shingle," Bodden called from the roof, his shirt off in the warm spring sun. Zephyra tossed it up to him, admiring the way his muscles moved as he worked. Marriage agreed with both of them. She'd put on some much-needed weight. Her face had lost its haunted look, and Bodden seemed to grow more confident and assured with each passing day. "Mrs. Ironwood," he said, climbing down the ladder with a grin, "I do believe we just finished our house." "About time, Mr. Ironwood. I was getting tired of sleeping in that tent." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed a sound that still surprised her with its pure joy. When he set her down, they both looked at their handiwork with pride. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and warm and built to last. "Got something for you," Bodden said, pulling a letter from his pocket. "Came with the mail delivery yesterday." Zephyra's smile faded when she saw the official seal. For a moment, the old fear clawed at her throat. "What is it?" "Good news, I think. Open it." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the document. As she read, her expression changed from fear to amazement to pure relief. "The Kansas Territorial Court has officially ruled my husband's death justifiable homicide," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The case is closed. There's no warrant, no charges pending. I'm free." "You were always free," Bodden sighed, pulling her close. "But now it's official." They held each other in the doorway of their new home, watching their small herd of cattle graze in the distance. The Ironwood Ranch sign that Bodden had carved swayed gently in the mountain breeze, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its liquid song. "Any regrets?" Zephyra asked. "About what?" "Taking a chance on a damaged woman with a dangerous past." Bodden tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes, those beautiful blue eyes that had first captured his heart. "The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to work up the courage to talk to you. You were worth waiting for," she said simply. "We both were." As if summoned by their contentment, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them turn. Sheriff Holloway rode up the trail, but he wasn't alone. Beside him rode a woman Zephyra didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Afternoon, folks," Holloway called as they dismounted. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion, but this lady's been asking after you, Mrs. Ironwood." The woman stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mrs. Ironwood? My name is Margaret Chun. I was your husband's sister." Zephyra felt Bauden tense beside her, his protective instincts immediately on alert. Her own body went rigid with old fears. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Margaret said quickly, seeing their reaction. "I came to apologize and to thank you." "Thank? Me?" Zephyra's voice was barely a whisper. "My brother was a violent man. Our family knew it, but we were too ashamed to speak of it. When news of his death reached us, along with the circumstances, Margaret's voice broke slightly. "I knew you must have suffered terribly. I came to tell you that his family doesn't blame you. We should have protected you from him, and we failed. The shame is ours, not yours." Tears began to flow down Zephyra's cheeks, not tears of grief or fear, but of healing. The final ghost from her past had been laid to rest. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You didn't have to come all this way, but thank you. There's something else." Margaret reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a small wooden box. "This was our mother's. Richard had no right to keep it from you during the marriage. It should have been yours from the beginning." Inside the box was a delicate gold locket and chain, clearly an heirloom of some value. Zephyra stared at it in amazement. "I can't accept this. It belongs to your family." "You were family," Margaret said firmly. "You suffered for it, and you deserve better than you received. Please." After a few more minutes of conversation, Margaret and the sheriff rode away, leaving Zephyra and Bauden alone with their thoughts and their bright future. "You know what this means?" Bauden said as they watched the riders disappear down the trail. "What? The past is truly behind us now, nothing but tomorrow ahead." Zephyra fastened the locket around her neck, feeling its weight as a symbol of acceptance and forgiveness. Then she turned to her husband, her gentle giant, her protector, her equal partner in all things. "What do you see in our tomorrow?" she asked. Bauden looked out over their land, their cattle, their sturdy house with smoke beginning to rise from the chimney. "I see children playing in that meadow. I see us growing old together on this porch. I see love that lasts forever, just like what I felt the moment I first saw you." "When you first saw me, it was love at first sight," Zephyra said, echoing the words that had started their journey together. "Still is," Bauden replied, kissing her softly. "Every morning when I wake up and see your face, it's love at first sight all over again." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they went inside their home together. Outside, the wind sang through the pines and the cattle lowed contentedly in their pasture. The Ironwood Ranch was more than a place. It was a promise kept, a love fulfilled, and a testament to the truth that sometimes the biggest hearts come in the most unexpected packages. And in the years that followed, whenever folks in Copper Falls told the story of the giant cowboy and the mysterious woman who'd brought justice to their town, they always ended it the same way. True love don't come easy, but when it comes true, it's worth every hardship you endured to find it. The Ironwoods would have agreed completely.